r/NoSleep. Posted by Reddit user Spite Goddess. I run a museum of cursed objects. Let me tell you about the Nokia room. First of all, I'm sure some of you are wondering what happened with that vintage wedding dress. I'm pleased to announce that it's now displayed in the museum. The shadow box it's pressed in is covered with thick black fabric. We've posted a sign advising any women in unfulfilling relationships with men not to come anywhere near it. It didn't seem inclined to whisper violent nothings to women in unfulfilling relationships with people who aren't men. We have also advised adulterous or abusive men not to look at the dress for their personal safety. From what we've seen, it only affects women, and only through direct line of sight, but best be cautious. Because it's interesting, here's what M was able to tell me about the history of the dress. Evidently, it was owned by a woman by the name of Victoria Thatcher. She was trying on her wedding dress on an eve before her wedding. She had walked in on her to-be husband sleeping with her sister and had flown into a rage. She had screamed at the man and told him she was leaving. Apparently, that didn't go over well because he killed her by slamming her head against the corner of the armoire. Anyway, last week, one reader expressed concern regarding the rules of the Nokia room. If you recall, it reads, "Visit the Nokia cell phone room at your own risk. The museum will not be held responsible for any chance of deaths." We at the Hall of the Cursed would like to put your minds at ease, or at least, that's what M wants me to do. Apparently, it's bad business to post a bunch of random, ominous-sounding rules without explaining them. Thing is, though, there are a ton of them, as you saw. Therefore, I'll talk about this one, since it's admittedly one of the most potentially dangerous exhibits in the museum. The Nokia cell phone room is interesting because it's another object I procured myself, while the vast majority of items in the museum were obtained by my mother or their parents, and so on. Actually, it's the entire reason the museum exists, in a very big way, but I'll get to that. Technically, the cursed object is a block-like outdated cell phone. We've simply placed it in the soundproof room for safety. Outside, it stands a prominent sign that reads, "Please read carefully before entering the Nokia cell phone room. All visitors to the room must understand the following. The glass encasing the cell phone is not soundproof, but the walls of the room are. Always close the door behind you, whether entering or leaving. Do not attempt to fiddle with the glass. Very rarely, the cell phone will make a beeping sound. If this sound is heard, the visitor who hears it will experience something significant in the next 24 hours. Please alert the staff if the sound is heard, so that they may get your contact information for further study. Entering the room carries with it a very real chance of death. This is not a joke. Turn back if it's not for you. Children under the age of 18 are not allowed to enter the room. If an employee catches you attempting to bring a child into the room, you will be permanently banned. You can begin to understand with this sign why our entry contract includes a line about the Nokia cell phone room. Of course, the above rules took time to develop, time during which we weren't sure exactly how dangerous it was. The only way to know was to collect information, which we did from visitors who were undeterred by the sign above. Now, you might be thinking, "Wow, Alex, it sounds like a little bit evil to expose people knowingly to something that could kill them." To that, I respond, yeah, fair. We try to make the risk clear to our patrons, and though we can't guarantee all of them will take them seriously, most folks we get in here are pretty informed and smart about this sort of thing. So when they see a sign that says, "This might kill you," they usually understand that it might kill them. Plus, we don't let kids in, since M and I don't feel their life should be at stake based on the choices of their parents. And really, my only excuse is that the only way to make things safer and better contained in this place is to study it, Research it until we know it inside and out. In the case of Herman the kind of bug, we didn't do our research properly, and the results were not good. How did we discover this cell phone among however many Nokia cell phones are probably out there right now, resiliently refusing to die in some gutter or the bottom of a drawer of someone's childhood bedroom, I hear you ask? Well, I had just turned 22. My mother had died only a few months before in a tangle with the object, which I refuse to talk about, but rest assured, it's not in my museum. It was still a few more months before I'd meet Em, so I was by myself, except for the company of Jan the janitor, obviously. But he's not what I would call a touchy-feely sort of guy. Thing. Whatever he is. I was pretty forlorn, honestly. A little bit of depression comes with the territory, I think. But it had never been less bad before. When my mom's old work cell phone rang, I nearly jumped out of my skin, where I was lounging in the exact same place I'd been for 3 days before. I'd been keeping the phone charged, as I knew it was supposed to, but I never expected it to ring. Somehow, I prompted my body to move, and it did. I picked up the phone. "Hello?" said the voice on the other end. It was shaky and fragile sounding, as though it were an old woman. "Alex speaking." "Oh, I was just, looking for May and Leah," said the voice sounding close to tears. I'll go. Sorry, dearie." The sound of my mother's name caused new tears to come in my eyes. But this person sounded like they needed help, so I forced out words. "Wait," I said hurriedly. "Wait, I'm their daughter, Alex. How can I help you?" There was a long pause, and when the person spoke again, I could tell they were testing the waters. "Well, May and Leah had given me their card in case something ever popped up. Would you happen to know when they'd be back?" "They're dead," I snapped, much more harshly than I meant to. I took a deep breath to steady myself, and then continued. "They're dead, but I'm in the same business. I can help you." The person gave me an address, nearly sobbing now. It was hard to keep them coherent long enough to write it all down. I asked if there was immediate danger, a routine question for this sort of thing, when I was told, maybe? I don't think so. I hauled my butt out of bed. That wasn't encouraging enough of an answer to let me sleep the rest of the day away. It was a nearly 6-hour drive. It took me to some nowhere town in the middle of barren wheat fields. Although the house itself looked nice enough, it was situated smack in the middle of the fields and was ringed by a solid barrier of thick pine trees, no doubt to protect against the brutal winds that had been pushing my car all around the road while I drove. When I arrived, it was getting dark. Waiting for me on the front porch, clad in a ridiculously fluffy pink robe and carrying an old orange tabby cat, was the most wizened old lady I had ever seen. She looked like what I can only describe as the inside of an old dried out apple. The moment I stepped out of my car, she burst into tears again. Several minutes and a full box of tissues later, I was sitting in the dining room of her house, which was quite cozy and filled with pictures with her loving relatives. "I'm so sorry for your loss, dearie," the woman said. "May and Leah were good people. Gosh, you look just like May, don't you?" "What's your name?" I asked. "Oh, forgive me," said the woman, clutching at her chest so suddenly her cat hissed. She stroked it placatingly. "I'm Rose, and I think I have the same sort of problem your mom's dealt with." She gave a great sniffle into the offended feline's fur. "When they were still young things, they and their mom and dad came by to help my son with some sort of cursed hourglass, and I kept the card, even though I didn't believe in all that hullabaloo at the time." "Why don't you tell me what happened?" Immediately, the wailing restarted. When they finally subsided, the woman sniffled. I've lost everyone. It's all that damn phone." She pointed then to an old cell phone that sat so innocently that I hadn't even noticed that, on the corner of the heavy oak table. It didn't look cursed. It didn't even really feel cursed. A little odd, maybe, but you often get that sort of feeling off of neglected old objects, regardless if they intend you harm. Still, I wasn't going to touch it until I figured out what the deal was. "Go on." "It started out with my youngest grandson receiving an old, used cell phone for Christmas," she said. "My daughter thought he was old enough, since he'd entered middle school. I disagreed, but that isn't the point." "Your grandson?" I prompted gently. She flushed slightly. "Oh, I mean he's actually fine. In fact, the day after he got the thing, he stumbled across $1,000, just lying on the ground. He's a good kid, so he tried to see if anyone had lost it. But when it became apparent that no one was going to come for it, he kept it, bought himself a newer phone, and we gave this to a different member of the family." "Okay, that didn't sound very tragic." "Who?" Her face fell. "My son," she murmured. "He needed a phone because, well, he needed everything. He was always a troubled boy. Gambled away his money, did some unpleasant things to a number of people. Our whole family cut him off except for me. I couldn't. I thought the phone might help him. Actually, I thought it might be lucky." Her laugh was humorless. "Less than a day after I gave it to him, he was brutally murdered. He was attacked by 6 people, complete strangers, on drugs. I gave her several moments with her grief before reminding her to go on. "What next, Rose?" It didn't actually sound overly connected to the phone, but I knew not to judge a book by its cover by then. She straightened her curved old back as far as it would go, which wasn't very far. "We passed the phone around, kept giving it from family member to family member. The ones that weren't doing well, who needed a spare phone. I mean, we had no way of knowing this thing was cursed. And sometimes it seemed like it was fine and nothing would happen. But then, that family member would pass it on to someone else who needed it more, who couldn't afford it, and there would be another death." At this, she shivered. "Horrible, gruesome deaths too. None of that dying in your sleep business. Muggings, random crimes, murders, poison to death. My nephew, cyanide. Each death that happened was within a day of the family member receiving the phone." Now that was interesting, I thought. Still not definitive proof, but like I said, the thing did give off a bit of a funny feeling. Nothing vengeful, necessarily. But then, a lot of cursed objects aren't until they're activated by some sort of trigger. Until then, their energy is in a well of sorts, deep within. Unfortunately, that means I have to see it in action to know if it's truly a curse. At least, that's what it meant until M and her sensitive nature. In this case, like I said, there was no M. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, and motioned towards the phone. "May I touch it?" Rose shivered again. "Go ahead." I did. The second my hand made contact with the phone, it beeped. A little beep. Innocuous, neutral. But the second I heard it, dread washed over me. With the sound came a feeling as familiar as breathing, but far more terrifying. It was a release of energy of sorts. I guess the only way I can describe it is as the feeling you get when you're standing on a balcony in front of a coming storm. The winds have not fully reached you yet, but the sky is brewing with something dark, forbidding ahead. And while you gaze into the depths, that first gust of winds hits you, and nearly knocks you off your feet, and you can smell the storm. What I'm saying is, in that moment, I knew I, like the others, had been cursed. My immediate reaction was visceral, primal fear. I tossed the phone away from me, breathing heavily. The feeling of the curse still lingered, nothing but a slight scent of rain on the remaining breeze. But there, nonetheless. Rose was watching me sadly, I realized. I cursed my own unprofessionalism and smiled at her, my spine still tingling. My apologies. Seems I was startled by an incoming text. "That's the other thing," said Rose and gestured towards the phone. Nervously, I picked it up again. The screen looked normal enough, but there were no new text messages. None at all, in fact. I assumed they'd been wiped when the last owner had died. Nonetheless, the noise I heard had definitely come from the phone. I flipped it over, and my heart pounded in my chest. Yeah, I wasn't imagining things. The battery was missing. "I took it out after it beeped at me this morning," Rose explained. "I can't make it turn off, no matter what I do. And the battery that had been in there was clearly corroded anyway. I doubt it's been battery driven for a long time." She sighed, leaning back in her chair and suddenly looking more peaceful than I'd seen her. "I know I will probably be dead by tomorrow morning, but I couldn't stand it if it went to someone else and continued hurting people. Please, will you lock it away from me?" I stared blindly at the phone, wearing with myself. My sense of honor and duty said to stay the night. Try to protect her from whatever the curse was. My self-preservation instinct screamed that I needed to figure out a way to save myself. My logic said that the best way to do that was to see exactly what the curse did to Rose, and my empathy said that was a horrible, selfish thing to think. Most of all, I knew that I probably couldn't save Rose, no matter what I did. The thing about cursed objects is that, although they usually contain some residual energy, they're not the same thing as ghosts attached to something, or even demons. The energy is stored within the object itself, and based on how the cursed object was made, the energy adheres to very strict rules. It doesn't shy away from salt or iron. Praying generally has zero effect. The only way to stop a curse, usually, is to do something as ritualistic and specific as whatever it was that triggered the curse, and that took time to figure out. Research into history and such. And even if I had the time, it seemed to me that the phone didn't have a specific trigger. It seemed just being near someone was enough to trigger the curse. Perhaps physical touch. I wasn't certain. Either way, Rose was probably doomed. I knew that. Actually, Rose, I'd like to stay the night, if you wouldn't mind. Her eyes widened and alarmed, and I hastened to add, after that, I would be happy to take the phone with me. Rose's old gray eyes crinkled, and what looked like sympathy. "Certainly, dearie," she said warmly. We had a nice night, Rose and I. We watched some show where people sang very badly, while I flipped through websites on my smartphone, desperately trying to figure out a fix for my current situation. To save myself, to save Rose. When dawn came, I had come up with nothing. Rose woke up soon after, and calmly went about her morning routines, making coffee, watching birds chirp outside the windows. I followed Rose like a hawk. It was possible that I could physically ward off the disaster until 24 hours had passed. Sometimes, curses are like that. If they aren't fulfilled past a certain time period, they won't happen. Even more common, though, is that no matter what you do, what a curse does cause to happen will happen. Rose's case was one of the first to really cement this in a very real, very graphic way. It happened so fast, I couldn't be sure what happened. I rose from my chair to grab a bagel Rose had generously offered me. Then I tripped, as if over nothing but air, completely out of my control. My flailing hand smacked her knife rack, which flipped into air before my disbelieving eyes. Mid-air, the knives floated out of the knife rack and floated almost magically at Rose. In mere seconds, it was over, and Rose had a new knife rack. I remember being so afraid. My mothers were gone, and I was alone, and I was going to die. I knew it. I was so afraid I had forgotten to even call the police. I drove out of that place, barely remembering to stuff that horrid Nokia phone in my pocket. I put my foot to the floor like it was made of lead, and never let up till I got home. I crawled inside my apartment and hid under my covers, and cried. The 24-hour mark since I had touched the phone was approaching. I sobbed uncontrollably, only pausing when I ran out of air, my tired lungs and sore intercostal muscles forcing a pause in which I gasped instead of crying. With 5 minutes to go, I heard a knock at the door. I almost didn't open it. I almost stayed crouched under my covers and resigned myself to wait for my death. But my mothers entered my mind. Their fight against the curse of the object. They never shied away. They didn't hide under their covers. They knew they would die, and they did it with dignity. I stood up. I wiped the tears from my face. I opened the door. There stood my neighbor. He was a working class guy, plain and kind. There was a dazed look in his eyes, like he wasn't really seeing me. He put his hands into his pocket, and I flinched, awaiting the knife I was so sure he was holding. Instead, he held out the hugest bundle of cash I'd ever seen. "Someone gave it to me," he said blankly. "They said you should have it." I eyed him dubiously. "Mark, are you okay?" "You must take it," he said. It was a familiar voice, somewhat tiny and unassuming, but there was something behind it. Power or energy or something. I don't know. I'm not the psychic, remember? Hesitantly, I took the money. Immediately, the feeling of the curse hanging over me dissipated, leaving me so relieved I almost cried again. My neighbor turned around and went back into his apartment without sparing me a second glance. He had given me $10,000. It took me until Em joined the team to figure out fully what was up with the Nokia phone. Even she isn't sure exactly the cause of the curse. But it's clear that the results of the curse will always occur within 24 hours of the potential victim, or victor, hearing the beeping tone of the phone. From our research, only those who physically hear the beeping of the phone are subject. Those who view but do not hear it do not seem to be affected. Furthermore, it only seems to actually beep for a very small number of subjects. Even when exposed to many, our current data shows a 2% beep rate, as Em calls it. Out of those who hear the beep, from our follow-ups, we found that 90% come into a great deal of money and walk away with perfect health, while 10% die horribly bloody deaths. We're still researching a way to stop the curse, but we haven't had success so far. Although we've tried just about everything, we're also trying to figure out why Rose's family had such a disproportionate response compared to our test group. Why did most of her family hear the beep? And why did most of those who did die? It's possible the phone distinguishes who is bad and good, who deserves to be punished or rewarded. On some basis, we often find that cursed objects use arbitrary rules to decide who to curse, if they don't affect everyone. Still, if that's the case, we don't know yet. More observation is the only way. In the meantime, if you don't want to die, we advise you not to enter the Nokia cell phone room. Remember, following these rules is paramount to your enjoyment of our lovely museum.